Okay. The name. Learning the Mishnah Sakaya. Golda. Stub Sevachain. Dr. Stein's mother. Okay, we're just gonna start from the Mishnah and Tzadik Aleph. Yeah. Tzadik Aleph from the base. I used to be Yadav. If the worker is doing work with his hands, but not with his feet. I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe he's not walking around while he's doing it. Or maybe he's only walking, but he's not doing work with his hands. Or maybe he's not doing work with his feet or his hands. He's only doing work with his shoulders. Then it doesn't matter what he's doing. You see, what we're doing over here is we're doing a comparison between man and the animals. The animals you're not allowed to muzzle, right? So we did a comparison. The animals do work with their hands and feet. They only have feet, but their front feet are called hands. Yeah. So here, if but then they're using their feet.
The feet, isn't that like when they're treading
maybe
grapes
Right. So it's not, can't be transported. I don't know what he's doing. He's lifting something. I don't know. Getting it higher, getting lower. Maybe someone else is doing that work. Okay. Whatever the case is, the Tanakama holds he's still allowed to eat. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, this is Rabbi Yehuda Darilai's son. His name is Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. He says no, you have to be doing with hands and feet. You're going to see in the Gemara what's the reason. My time, what's the reason for the Tanakama? It says when you come into your friend's vineyard, whatever you're going to do over there, it doesn't matter if it's with the hands and feet, whatever it is, you're allowed to eat because you can't be muzzled. You're a worker. Rabbi Yehuda says that no, you have to be doing work with the hands and feet. My time, Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason for Rabbi Yehuda? Kishar. Do a comparison to an animal. There's a comparison between the chaysim to the nechsam. Chaysim is muzzler to the muzzled, right?
He has no muzzle.
Right.
Because he's been muzzled.
He has no muzzle. Mashar actually has to go to the raglav, just like an ox does work with his hands and feet because he only has feet, so the hands are the whatever. Actually has to go to the raglav. So to the worker has to do work with his hands and feet. Rabbi Baravuna has a question. It's Rabuna's son, Rabba. Rabuna was a student of Rab. Let's say instead of using an animal, he uses a chicken or a goose. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, what's going to be the din according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda? He holds you need to use your hands and feet. But a chicken or a goose doesn't have hands. It only has feet. Maybe it only has hands. I don't know. So, do we say that what's the reason? What is the point of the hands and feet? That means you're using your entire strength. Okay? He's using the entire strength. His whole weight is all on those feet. By Dilma, or maybe beyond of maybe you need literally the hands and feet. You need literally the hands and feet. But you don't have the hands and feet by a chicken or by a goose. Take the Gemara leaves it as a question. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Baravua. Nachman says the name of Rav Baravua. That's his father-in-law. Thing is like this. We're going to learn this in the next Mishnah, that you're only allowed to eat from the work that you're actually doing. You're not allowed to eat from something that you're not actually doing. You're not allowed to eat from. So if you're working with the grapes, then you're allowed to eat the grapes. If you're working with the wine, you're allowed to drink the wine. But if you're pressing the grapes, you're working with the grapes and you're also making the wine. But the only thing is, what's the main thing over there? So it says that if you did not walk crisscross on all the grapes, then you're not considered working with the wine. It's not enough wine to be working with wine. You're only working with grapes. So even if wine is dripping down, but that's not, you still really can't be drinking that. You're only allowed to be eating from the grapes until you walk crisscross, and then we say, oh, no, you're working already with wine now. Then we can do that. Okay, that's based on what we learn now in the Mishnah. If someone is working with figs, he's not allowed to eat the grapes. If he's working with grapes, he's picking grapes. He's not allowed to eat the figs. A person is allowed to starve himself until he gets to the place of the better grapes, or the better figs, whichever one he's working with, and then he fills himself up over there. He waits for the good stuff, right? He doesn't want to fill up on the cheap, cheap grapes.
He's allowed to starve himself.
Yeah, he's allowed to refrain from eating, so that he'll have a big appetite for the good stuff. And all of these are only while he's actually doing work. He's not allowed to just eat while he's not doing work. But the rabbis instituted in order to return a lost object to the owner. What they said was, they said, while they're walking from one row to another row, they are allowed to munch on food. The reason why they said this is they don't want him to take away time from work. Since over there he's not really doing real work, he's just walking. They said it would be better for us. We would rather that he eats while he's walking from one row to another. That would save us. From him taking off time to eat. Okay. And also when he's returning from the press. The donkey is allowed to eat when it's taking off the load. We're going to see in the Gemara what that means. Gemara is the question. If we said in the Mishnah that you're not allowed to, if you're working with grapes, you're not allowed to eat the figs, right? If you're working with figs, you're not allowed to eat the grapes. Let's say you're working with grapes on one side of the field. You're allowed to eat grapes from the other side of the field. Same species, same type.
Both?
No, you're working with one of them, but it's both grapes. So, does it need to be the same species that you're putting into the master's vessels? That's what you're allowed to eat? Or it's from what? Is it mimin or mima? Mimin or mima? Mimin means from the same species. Mima means from the same plant.
Grapes and figs are the same species?
No, we're talking about now. We said that if you're working with grapes, then you can't eat the figs.
Right.
You're not allowed to. Let's say you're working with grapes. Are you allowed to eat other grapes from a different vine? You like that vine better? Maybe a little larger. They have more bricks. They measure the sugar in the grapes.
But you're allowed to do kalayim with these different species of grapes, right?
Probably. Well, it doesn't say we're doing different species of grapes. That we're talking about a different tree of grapes, different vine. Let's say a different species. If one's green and one's red, that may be considered different also. Gemara's not asking that. Gemara's asking if you have the same type.
Vine and then you go to a different.
You go to another vine to take the grapes from that. Maybe they look nicer or something. Okay, that's the Gemara's question. Let's say you're going to say. You're able to say that if you're working with this vine, you're not allowed to eat from another vine. Let's say that's the halacha. You follow? Let's say the halacha is that you can only eat from the vine that you're working with, not from a different vine. If that's the case, how we learned before that the worker, we learned, is allowed to eat even if it's detached from the ground. They had a big kiddush. The ox is allowed to eat when it's even attached to the ground, even though that's not what it's talking about. We learned that out. But one second, how could an ox ever eat from what's attached to the ground if the one that's doing the work stands behind the ox, putting the grapes into the wagon that the ox is pulling, and the ox himself eats? You see, the mouth of the ox is in the front, the wagon of the ox is in the back, the worker stands in the back. So how does the ox ever eat from the same vine that the worker is working from?
Well, it's a long vine. It goes all the way from the ox's
even from
mouth.
From what it's working. It's working as pulling the wagon, but that's on another vine. So obviously you're allowed to eat. But the Gemara is thinking, what was that?
Hollywood and Vine.
But I'm
famous address.
But I'm a little confused. So we learned that an employee can eat produce that's not attached to the ground.
we learned it out from the animal because the animal is allowed to, and then we learned from the animal, from the worker, that the animal can also.
I think I asked you. I thought that was just.
No, there's other halachas that are reserved for the poor. But this is while he's working. If it's, whatever it is, let's say they have a person that's stamping on the grain. Threshing. Okay. Now the Gemara says like this. So we have a question. If you're going to accept that you're not allowed to eat from a different vine, then how is the animal allowed to eat what's attached to the ground? Is it going to be, obviously it's going to be a different vine. My answer is Amar Shisha Breder Avidi B'Sharcha. It's talking about this massively a long branch that's going from the back of the animal all the way to the front of the animal. So it's really the same vine. And that's where the worker is standing in the back and he's working on this branch and the branch is going over there. It's really the same vine and he's able to eat. Okay, came up with the ukimta. Ukimta means a scenario where it actually fits. Tashima, come and listen. The Mishnah said that if you're working with figs, you're not allowed to eat grapes. But let's say it's figs and figs, similar to figs and grapes, you're allowed to eat. In other words, the whole problem was only because it's a different type, not because it's a different brand, and not because it's a different vine, because it's a different type. So, but let's say it's the same type, but a different tree, then it sounds like you'll be allowed to eat. But if you say that if you're working on one vine, you're not allowed to eat from the other one, then how is it possible?
It's just interesting. Like, what if there's a vineyard and you have like really expensive grapes, like for better wine? And
you're going to see on the next page. Wait for the next Mishnah, you'll see about that. So the Gemara answers, Amar of Shisha Breder Avidi b'Maidlas. Okay, so this is like a whole story of what happens now, just with that one word. What's happening here is that we had trees were like overlapping each other. So you had to lift up one to be able to work with the other one. Maybe the figs are hanging over the grapes, and you have to lift up the figs to take the grapes out. So it says that because you're not working with the figs, then you're not allowed to eat the figs. You're only collecting grapes now. But even though they're mamish attached, they're hanging over one of them. So what that means is that really you're not allowed to eat from the same type, and you're really not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat from a different type. And you're also not allowed to even eat from the same type that's a different tree. So if it would be then you would be allowed to eat when they're mamish together. It won't be considered a different vine, even if maybe it's like a different source. But because they're all meshed together, that's considered, even if you're taking from one, it's considered that you're working with the same one because they're all together, and you would be allowed to eat from the other figs that are hanging over this fig tree. No, it definitely does matter. If it's one grapes, one figs, you're not allowed to. You need to have both. But if they're growing together, similar to the story where one was figs and one was grapes, so then, and now this is figs and figs, or grapes and grapes, then you would be allowed to eat. I think it's trees are allowed. I think it was only grain in the vineyard was the problem. Okay. Tashima, come on, listen, we're still trying to figure out if the problem is a different species that you're not allowed to eat, or if it's even the same species, just from a different area or a different tree. So come and listen, it says like this. A person is allowed to starve himself or hold himself back from eating until he gets to the more expensive ones, the good ones, and then he's gonna, there he's gonna stuff himself. 1 second. Why do you have to wait till you get there if you're allowed to eat from the same type, but just from a different area? If you're allowed to eat it, so why do you have to wait till you get there? Go ahead and eat it and take some and come back and work. We said that you should be allowed to eat from a different tree or a different area as long as it's the same type. Nazel v'nesei v'nechel. Go over there, bring and eat it. Gemara says, "Hasam mishum bittul melacha." Over there, that's not a problem. That it's not allowed. It's not a monetary thing. It's not that the Torah doesn't allow you to eat from the other one. Maybe you really are allowed to eat from another one. But over there, the problem was that if you're going to go walk over there to do that, that's considered wasting money from the owner, because the owner is hiring you. You're stealing his money. You're not doing work while you're walking over there to get those better grapes.
Did you just say he could starve himself?
Until he gets there.
I thought you just knew it and when an animal you couldn't not plant an animal so that way you went
You could, yes.
Oh, you were allowed to do that?
Yeah. Right? You said you were allowed. You were allowed to starve the animal beforehand. Yeah.
By covering it with a blanket, right?
This is different because this
You said it was different than the blanket.
Here's the person.
Here's the person. Right.
Eat.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I don't think they're that smart.
No, we're talking about the owner over there. Okay. So we're holding now that the issue over there, the reason why you weren't allowed to go and take grapes from the better ones and come back and do your work by the lower quality, that was because bittul malacha. You're taking away time from work when you're doing that, walking around. Yeah, someone described to me how it works with a government job. First a half hour, 45 minutes, is discussing what they're going to order for breakfast. Everyone's looking at the website, like what we're going to get. And then they decide they do a raffle, who's going to go pick it up. Then they wait for it to show up, and then it goes up. Then you take some papers in your hand and you walk around to another floor where you schmooze with some people. And then there's lunch already. Then you choose what they're going to get for lunch. And that's basically how the day goes by. Anyway, over here is learning that you're not. Sorry?
Sounds pretty accurate.
It's
spoke to some government.
Have you ever been to the courthouse and see things like this?
No, someone told me actually
DMV.
he had a job in the public school, and it was doing computers at the back end, and he was doing work, and the guys where he started to yell at him, no, you're gonna lose our funding. Somehow, if you do work, then it's gonna look like you can get it. You're doing it too fast, then we're gonna lose the. Fine, we need a grant of a certain amount. You have to go slower. You can't. Anyway, okay. So we're talking about now. We're talking about. So what was our option? Let's say our question is. Let's say you're not going to be the one to go because you're not allowed to go walking in the middle of your work. You can't take papers and walk around and waste time from your job. You have to be working the whole time. You're getting paid by the hour. So what we're talking about is that your wife and children bring your family to work day, and they could go and get you the food and bring it back, and you'll eat while you're working. So what's going to be the din then? So Tashma, come and listen. It says that you're only allowed to eat while you're doing work. But because of returning a lost object to the owner, we've allowed you to eat even while you're walking from one row of vines to the other. Amro, they said, he said that you're allowed to eat while you're walking. And now listen to this. Sabrua, the Gemara understood like this. When you walk from one vine to another, is that considered doing work? You finished one row, and now you're going to the next row. Is that considered work when you're walking from one to the other? If it's work, then you're allowed to eat while you're working, and you're walking. But if it's not considered work, then of course you're not allowed to eat because you're only allowed to eat while you're working. So maybe it's considered a break from work.
When you read sentences, there's a break between each sentence. So
it's the pause.
you're still reading Even though
You're still reading during the pauses?
Yeah.
That's considered a read. That's considered reading.
What if you're on your lunch break at work? Is that considered?
No, you can't eat. You can't eat. Yeah, you can eat your lunch, but you can't eat you can't eat the owner's grapes.
Uh-huh.
I had a job with no lunch breaks. I had to eat in between jobs.
Right. There's a whole discussion. If a teacher in a yeshiva, he teaches Torah, and then he has he does the mincha, and is the davening considered his break time, or is it considered his work time? There's a minion in the so everyone the teachers daven with me. Is that considered their on break, or is that considered their work?
You said work. Because it's part of the avodah, number one. And number two, they're setting an example for the Talmud.
Right, that makes sense. Okay.
Imagine if they say, sorry, I'm after daven, it's break time. What can we teach them?
They could keep order.
I'm sorry?
That they could keep order during the prayer.
Right. That would be like a babysitting work, right? Yeah, that could be. So here it says, while they're walking, is that considered work? So it is considered work, walking. One second. Why, if it's work, then why is he allowed to eat? The Mishnah says he's allowed to eat because we made a special dispensation for them in order to return a lost object to the owner, in order to save the owner, the worker's time. So the sages allowed him to eat even while he's walking from one to another. 1 second. But if that's considered work, then why do we need a special reason for him that he should be allowed to eat? Of course he's allowed to eat, he's at work. It must be the reason is because you're really not allowed to eat from one vine when you're at another vine. So we're saying that even though you've left the vine, you're still allowed to eat, even though you're not standing next to that vine. You're not doing work at the vine when you're eating from the vine, because you took a bunch of grapes in the end, now you're walking that way. So this is a proof that obviously, you're not allowed to eat at another vine. Where it says like, it's not. Really, you're allowed to, if you're at one vine, you're allowed to eat at another vine. It's really, you should be allowed to eat anyway while you're walking. So what's the reason why we need a special dispensation here that he should be allowed to eat? Because walking is not considered work. That's what we're saying now. That walking is not considered work. And therefore, really you're not allowed to eat. Because you're not at work. You're not at work, you're not allowed to eat. You're only allowed to eat while you're working. But if you are working, then you should be allowed to eat. Now 1 second. If it would be considered work, then you should be allowed to eat. Now 1 second. If you're allowed to eat, that means you're allowed to eat even when you're not working at that vine. We have an answer. You don't have to be at that. You don't have to eat from the same vine that you're working at, because here you walked away from it. The Gemara says, really, if you're working with this vine, you're not allowed to eat from another vine. 1 second. So if you're not allowed to eat from another vine, then so if that's the case, so if it's considered that you're doing work,
Yet since one who was performing labor on this vine may not eat from another vine, he would not be entitled to eat while walking.
we were thinking that since it's considered work, so really, if it's not considered work, but if it would be considered work, then you should be allowed to eat. But 1 second, but you're not at the same vine because you're walking away from it. Gemara says no. really, you're not allowed to eat when you walk away from it. So what's the reason over here why this is a special case? Is mahalach chaysim because really this is considered work. Since this is considered work, you really should be. But the reason why we have a special dispensation here is because you walked away from it, which makes you not allowed to. And so we gave a dispensation that you should be allowed to. Yes, so it's yes, no, yes, because we tried to save the owner from any losses, and so we allowed you to eat while you're walking to the next line. And now on top of tzaddik base, the chamar kashuk parekes, a donkey when it's taking off its load, it's allowed to eat. Now kashuk parekes meichan achla. How does it eat, or from what source does it have to eat? There's different ways of reading this question. How does it eat when it's taking off the load? Ema, rather you should say until it takes off the load. That means it's allowed to turn its neck back and eat from the all that straw or whatever that it's carrying. Hey, Tanina Laditana Rabbana was taught in a Mishnah exactly what we taught in a Bryce exactly the way we just understood this from the Mishnah. It says, that a donkey or a camel are allowed to eat from what's on their back, but you're just not allowed to take the person that's walking is not allowed to take the feed that's on its back and feed it to him by hand. It has to turn around and eat it. Turn its neck up and grab it. Okay.
So whatever
reaches it could eat.
What were we learning the other day about the basket in front of the animal?
Yeah, we said that really in a case where it wasn't where you were allowed to muzzle it, we didn't want you to muzzle it anyway. We said because of Marasayan, you put a basket. What was the case we were allowed to muzzle it? You remember? Hektish or something. There were Truma, Demai. We had some cases where we were allowing you to muzzle it, but we didn't want people to think.
Then there was something about goy if he could.
Yeah, if you could give it to a guy and he would muzzle. Okay, Eichel Payal Kishas, this Yonatan you mentioned. A worker can eat cucumbers. I feel a dinar, even if they're worth a dinar. Dinar is zuz. It's a large amount of money. Kesebes, you can eat what's kesebes? A date. Kesebes date. I feel a dinar, even if it's worth a dinar. Rabbi Lazar Chisma says that a person is not. It's a very interesting name. A person is allowed to eat even more than his wages. May not eat. Lo yechal. Sorry. Lo yechal payal yasser al skari. Person is not allowed to eat more than his wages. Chav matir and the chum allow him. If it's going to eat more than his wages, the chum allow him. The chum, but they add in but they you train the person that he shouldn't be gluttonous. You say to him, if he is a glutton, he's not going to get any more job opportunities. Everyone's going to say, you don't want to hire him. He's going to eat you. He's going to eat you out of the house, right? Someone told me, nice chubby guy. He said, when I go to the buffet, I put them out of business. They pay one price and you take whatever you want. Okay, now the interesting thing here with Rabbi Lazar Chisma is that the Medrash says that he got the name Chisma because he went someplace. They asked him to daven for the Amud, and he didn't know how to daven. So he went back to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva taught him how to daven. When he came back, he silenced all of them. He's like shut their mouth. They shouldn't be able to comment. He davens nice. Now, an easy way to remember over here what Rabbi Lazar Chesma's opinion is because chesem means to muzzle. So he says a person should not eat more than what his wages are. Or not wages, more than the value of his work, which I guess that means his wages. Okay. Which basically means that they do muzzle him. Rabbi Lazar Chisma muzzles the person, not Chisma means to muzzle.
Except one's got it with the sama from one with the silk.
No, there's a boat with the sama. Yes, Mama Shit. No, but like Sachsheim Sherbedishay. Don't muzzle.
Oh, I'm looking at the third one.
Oh, Saisim, Saisim. Saisim is the best means you lose out on opportunities. Chachamim ain't the Tanakama. The Gemara says the Chachamim is the Tanakama. Tanakama says you're allowed to eat the value of a dinar. The Chum say you're allowed to eat even if it's more than your wages. It could be nayu. The Gemara says there's a difference between them. Aval malam. According to the Chum, we train the person not to eat so much because he's going to lose opportunities. According to the Tanakama, we don't mix in. Now, there's a problem over here. Like, I mean, why don't you give him good advice? He's not going to get another job. Okay, anyway, the Tanakama, less than malamdim. According to the Tanakama, we don't train him not to eat so much. Rabban Nislam malamdim, according to the Rabbanan Basra, according to the later sages, we do train him. Some say the difference between them is the teaching of Rabasi, which Damar Rabasi says we're going to have two statements from Rabasi very similar. First one is, even if they hired him just to pick one cluster, he's allowed to eat. I don't know the size of the cluster. What was the name in the giant peach? What was
James and the giant
James and the giant peach. They had him pick one cluster. He's already allowed to eat. Amar Rabasi has another statement. Even not that he hired him to only to pick one cluster. All he did was pick one cluster. He's still allowed to eat.
Okay,
What's the difference between them? It's shricha.
He eat more than he picks.
Well, he can't eat more than he picks, but let's say he eats everything that he picks.
Yeah,
That's what's going on. According to this first statement, yeah. According to both statements, he's eating everything that he picked. Different is the first statement says he was only hired to pick one.
It's like a seafood diet. He sees food, he eats. He eats everything he sees.
At this time, the bullet was still big. They had to be carried on multiple people.
No, that was only one time in Eretz Yisrael by the spies. But Tzricha, we need both of these statements. You only say the first one, which the first one was he hired him to pick one cluster. We say that's because you're supposed to put into the owner's basket. But you were hired to pick one. Now, how can you put it into the owner's basket? You were hired to pick one. You can only pick one, and now you're allowed to eat, so you eat it. But if you were hired to pick for the owner's basket, say that maybe you have to put first into the owner's basket, and after you accomplish that, then you can start eating. But if it would only say that in the second case, where you only picked one, over there maybe you only picked one, but you can really pick more. But if there are no more to pick, you're only hired to pick one. Imaloi would say maybe you're not allowed to eat. So Tzricha has to say both. We have another pshat. The difference between the Tanakam, the Rab. Difference between the Tanakama and the Rabbanon is the teaching of Rab. Rab says, I found in a notebook. You see, they used to not write the Mishnayos because Mishnayos is the oral Torah also to be written. But the early sages would write it anyway, so they wouldn't forget things. They would write there. But there was a private writing.
Those were the baristas.
Priceless, yeah. So Rab says he found in a Megillah Star in Beir Rapchia in the house of Rapchia. Rapchia worked on the priceless. There it says Kasaba Isi ben Yudaimer that Isi ben Yehuda says Ki Sabe Bekerem Reacha. And the person comes into his friend's vineyard. You don't even have to be a worker. You're allowed to walk into anyone's vineyard and start eating. According to the Tanakama, it says only a worker is allowed to eat. According to the Chamim, anyone's allowed to eat. You're allowed to walk in. So Rab said, he commented on this. No one can survive. He's a teaching. Everyone's gonna just eat everyone else's food. Ravashi says, I said over this teaching in front of Rav Kana, and he said, no, maybe that's not what Isi meant. Maybe what Isi meant was that you're allowed to, any person, even if he's not hired, is allowed to go in, do work, and eat. But not that he's allowed to eat without doing work, where he's gonna do the work. Amarli, that's
They could just walk into people's fields
Right.
and eat their stuff.
What constitutes work? Like just like
Now,
picking one thing?
it doesn't say. The word Amarli, is that part of the question or is that part of the answer? Does it go Dilma Ba'isin B'Sudasim Da'avdu Da'achlu Amarli? Or does it go Da'achlu Ba'avdu? Question mark?
Da'avdu, Da'achlu, question mark, Amarli, colon.
Oh, okay. Amarli is he responded to me. That means, so I wonder who said this. Rav Ashi said it
Yeah,
to
Kana.
Rav Kana. The Amarli is Rav Kana talking?
Yeah.
Rav Kana responded?
It seems that way, yeah.
So Rav Kana responded. Yeah. Rav Kana said to me, Rav Kana was older. Rav Kana says to Rav Ashi, a person would rather hire workers that would come in and eat his food while they're working than to allow the entire world to come in and do work and eat. He doesn't want to do it yourself, self-checkout, where you come in, you do your work, and you eat. He'd rather have a worker there because he doesn't know good workers, not good workers. People are going to come in, they're going to botch everything up. I'd rather hire the people and they'll pay for the work and they'll eat. Maybe they'll eat too much, I don't know, whatever. But at least I know what I'm doing rather than just to leave it open for everyone to come in.
They've had a lot of interest in when they made all the checkout boxes.
Let's stop over here.
They've had a lot of success with that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.